Hello. Happy Wednesday. It is 11:11 on Wednesday, April 20th. It's also the 19th day of the month of Nisan. As for those of you following along on the Hebrew calendar with me, this month of Nisan. And it's the fourth day counting the Omer. So if you are in this group and you are following along, hopefully you have had the chance to watch Judy's meditation, which was amazing. So thank you all for your patience as we kind of figured out the best way to do this. So if you are still in watching this from the Self-Care Soul Care Sanctuary group, please head over to the private spring group. That is where all the meditations are. So, and that's where we will be posting a lot in there. And we hope that you guys do share with us your journey. So today we looked at the endurance of loving kindness. And I love doing the meditations, Judy. So we post them on the evening as the day begins, which is sundown. So this day 4 actually began last night at sundown, and it takes a while to kind of like get used to this counting the days that way. So I have a tendency to still watch the meditations in the morning, because that's when my mind is more focused. And so that's what I've been doing. And so this morning I loved just I love doing it. It sets an intention. It sets an intention for looking at this aspect. So endurance of love, right? And what I tend to first do is think about mine, right? What is my whatever, fill in the blank, endurance. And today it was really cool because I felt like what God was saying is the idea behind this is to realize what mine is, what his is, and understanding his endurance. And when the first thing I think of course, is the cross. Like, is there any sign, anything, anywhere that anyone's ever done to endure and to be consistent and to provide than that? I mean, no, there isn't, right? There's nothing that could compare. And it's not about comparing, but it's about really connecting and standing in the truth of that is the love that you have in him. And for me, I think that what has been hitting my heart different this year as I've been doing it is really just meditating on that and receiving that and realizing that I have that in me. You know, I'm made in his image, right? So the healing work that we do, all those things, they like pull the layers off so that we're able to do that on a deeper level, to rise up, if you talk about it on a way that's a higher mindset or a higher vibration or a higher understanding, right? To have endurance. I think as a parent, you learn a lot about that is hard to do without kids, because that's going to push you, and nothing is going to. You don't feel that way. For me, there's nothing that I wouldn't do, right? For my daughter, there's nothing, and so there's an open connection that I have in understanding that. So I loved that. And I love Judy's way of helping us connect and ground and really get into the intention. So if you haven't been able to jump on those, because I know it took us a while to figure this out, there's now 4 that you can catch up on. You can binge them if you want, but so powerful. So that's a beautiful thing. So today I really wanted to share a little bit about what this time is about. And it's about preparing for his power and his presence. That's what we're doing. We're literally preparing for that. When you think about what's happening in the days of the Israelites, we talked a little bit about how Resurrection Day was the day the Red Sea parted. All these things that Jesus fulfilled, everything he did fulfilled something from the Old Testament, something from what was set in history. He fulfilled it. So powerful just to think about that right there. So we get to align with that. And so this is about God bringing his people out of slavery, out of a poverty mindset, a slavery mindset, out of a not knowing who they were. Definitely not knowing who he was, who God was. And this was his time to share with them who he was. this next month is going to be very powerful. I love the teachings that are going to happen as we're really in the wilderness. So, so I love this is what Jason Sobel was sharing. Incredible stuff. He's doing the Omer for the first time, like publicly, and I saw a post that they're being inundated with people like, what is this and how do I do this? And so I posted a link to what he's got going out there. Amazing stuff. I just adore him. He has so much knowledge because he grew up Jewish, right? And his whole life, and then became a Christ follower later in life. So amazing when you listen to him. It just comes off of his head. It's amazing. So this is what I learned from him in the last few days. So I love how he talks about this. Hidden in the Passover week stands a little known appointment on the biblical calendar. And that's starting from the second night of Passover. God actually is initiating a 49-day minor festival, and that culminates on the day of Pentecost. Pentecost in Greek means 50. So it's literally the 50th day, right? It's called a first fruits festival, and it's known as the counting of the Omer, or the Omer. And it marks a culmination of three unique historical events. And it has an enormous significance in the life of a disciple of Yeshua. We are disciples of Christ. We are Christians. We are his disciples, right? And it's so incredible to see the significance of these festivals in our lives today, in America today, as we are grafted in to the promises to Abraham. So powerful. Okay, so the Torah roots this festival in the Thanksgiving offering of the first fruits of the barley harvest. This is right out of Leviticus 23:9 to Deuteronomy 16. It talks about that. And during this festival, the Torah demands the Israelites to bring the first sheaf, or the Omer in Hebrew, that's what that means, of the harvest to the temple before consuming the new barley and wheat crops. It's a first fruits teaching, right? They had to bring that to the temple before they could consume anything. They had to bring the first fruits of that. So this Torah precept battled against the agricultural customs of the day and of the Canaanite nation right there, because they related the growth of grain to various local little g gods, right? So the Canaanites followed all these little g gods, and they were the one, they claimed they were the ones that gave us this produce and all of this. And what God was teaching them is, no, you bring it to me because I am the one that provides with everything. And what God was doing here is he wanted to assure that the children of Israel would think, wow, would thank the proper God and not fall into the traps of idolatry. Goodness. I mean, all throughout, when you're reading about when the Israelites are taking the land, and having to clean out the Canaanites, and it was all about not falling into the idolatry of those nations. And it's very, very, very important. So we must never forget the one who supplies seed to the sower and bread for food, and will supply and multiply your seed and increase the harvest of your righteousness. That's in First Corinthians. So it's so easy for us to rely on, and we're surrounded all the time, right? To rely on a government or the company that we work for, or all those things where, or even in some cases, a church, where things can be, I don't know, used in a way that's not healthy, that's toxic, that's controlling, different things like that. We must always remember that where our supply comes from is from God. And that's a big underpinning of what this whole counting of the Omer is about. It was about bringing those first fruits and acknowledging that on a daily basis for these 49 days leading up to that. So additionally, too, the Torah prohibited using or eating any of the barley and wheat crops until the offering of the Omer, the first of the new grain, was brought to the Lord. So, beyond its agricultural significance, the Omer marks the 50 days between Exodus from Egypt and the giving of the Torah on Mount Sinai. That's what we're leading up to. So here is the connection between Passover and Shavuot, which is the Hebrew for Pentecost, as we reflect on how the holidays are celebrated. So check this out. This is so cool. So Passover centers around matzah. It's unleavened bread. We know that because when the Israelites had to flee, there was not time for the bread to rise. And so if you did a Passover Seder or have looked in that or experienced one, you serve unleavened bread. In fact, you don't eat anything that has leavening in it for 10 days, which we're still in that 10-day Passover period. So in the Hebrew culture, that's what they would do because they are centering their focus on aligning with that time with of their forefathers. So 50 days later, Shavuot includes an offering of 2 chametz, which is leavened, beautiful leavened loaves. Like if you've ever done the challah bread, and I am going to share with you guys our recipe that we love of that, because when you celebrate Shavuot or Pentecost, you bring 2 beautiful loaves. And it's the only time that actual leavened loaves are brought to the altar all year. This is Leviticus, right in Leviticus. All of it is. And what does this signify? What is the significance of this? What does this represent? Think about unleavened and then versus bringing 2 loaves. And there's always symbolism, right? There's always symbolism. So the maturing process of going from matzah to chametz bread symbolizes the spiritual maturing from going from freedom to slavery. I'm sorry, from slavery into freedom, right? From going into that, it's representative of that. So the matzah is the lack, it's the bare minimum, right? It's what we can do versus the abundance of the 2 loaves, of the double portion. So much symbolism in this. It's so beautiful. Okay, so this is the revelation of the Almighty to the receiving of his Torah at Mount Sinai. Imagine that they were given the tablets, and on the tablets were given the mitzvahs, they were given the commandments. So beautiful. So sandwiched between these 2 events is a 50-day period of spiritual growth. And the children of Israel needed to graduate through that status to become God's special nation. They had to have a deep understanding and a deep conviction on idolatry, on going to something else other than God for their provision, and understanding where it came from, because they were about to enter into a land where it was filled with people that were sacrificing their children. They were it's a very dark place to think about, but big G God, our God, the God of Israel, was not who they were sacrificing to and worshiping at all. So it's so amazing to think of all of this time is where God is really instilling in them who he is and who they are in him. Identity. What is the number one thing that is most attacked and most gone after in this nation? In a lifetime, but especially right now, is our identity as people, as humans, and as God's chosen children. So it's big. It's a big thing. So if we draw on this connection between Passover and Shavuot, we find a third significance of the period of the Omer. Because right at the beginning of this counting down, what happens is the resurrection of Sunday morning. And while the women discovered Yeshua's empty tomb, I never knew this, but the high priest Caiaphas was busy mixing the barley flour with oil and frankincense to prepare it. And he was preparing it as a bread for the first Omer offering. That's what they did then. That's what they all did. So that day, the same day of Yeshua's resurrection, began the 50-day count to the festival of Shavuot. And this link makes the counting of the Omer a season of particular significance. Why? Because we remember the resurrected Yeshua. as all of his post-resurrection appearances fell within that period. So when he came back and showed himself to the disciples, all that he did for those next 40 days were during this period. That's incredible. So when Jesus was in the upper room and they were doing the Seder meal, what they had done for thousands of years, he said, "Do this from now on in remembrance of me." And that's why this is so powerful, because it changed it forever. It changed this time and it added in this element of Yeshua, of following him. So all of his appearances fell within this period. Incredible when you think about. So Paul used the image of the Omer and the grain harvest when speaking of Yeshua's resurrection. Right here in 1 Corinthians 15:20, it says, "Just as the first fruits offering of the barley made all the rest of the barley harvest possible, so too the resurrection of the Messiah makes the resurrection of the dead possible." So I've read this before and I was like, okay, when we don't have an idea of what this is actually grounded in, because he's speaking to a Hebrew audience, and this is what they've done their whole life. They've counted the Omer. They've counted this. And now he's also drawing on that to help them to see, just as this first fruit offering of the barley makes all the rest of the barley harvest possible, that's what Yeshua does, is he makes the resurrection of the dead possible. We have new life. We have that. Wow, how much more depth is it when you have an understanding of that tradition, of that, what they did in that time. So after his resurrection, Yeshua appeared to his disciples in Jerusalem, and he commanded them, saying this, "I am sending the promise of my Father upon you, but you are to stay in Jerusalem until you are clothed with power from on high." That is Luke 24:49. I've read this before, of course, a lot. And I love understanding now this so much more of a significance of that. He's sending the promise of my Father upon you, but you are staying in Jerusalem until now. So 50 days later, when Shavuot had come, the disciples were all together in the temple in Jerusalem when they were all filled with the Ruach HaKodesh, which is God's Holy Spirit. And what happened? They began to speak. They began to speak in other tongues as the Ruach enabled them to speak out. So we think, oh, how amazing. They get to speak so that every person that is present there hears this message of the saving of Yeshua, of the blood, all of those things in their own language. And yes, that is powerful, and that is a part of it. That is a big part of it. But this was a fulfillment of the scattered nations as a result of the man's attempt to take matters into their own hands, right? By creating the tower to reach heaven. And God, what did he do? God said, if man comes together and works in unity, they can accomplish this. I'm going to confuse them. And he did. He confused them through their language. So we know this as the Tower of Babel. And so now, as a fulfillment to that, all nations would hear the truth of Yeshua. If you remember, in that time when there was, in Acts, when Peter is preaching and telling everybody what just happened, 3,000 were added to their number that day. And when you go back and you realize that when Moses came down and brought the tablets and they were all worshiping the golden calf, 3,000 were killed by a sword that day. So there's always a fulfillment. And what Jesus was doing in the power of Shavuot, which it saddens and it breaks my heart that we as Christians in churches do not celebrate this. We don't even talk about it. I learned about Pentecost and I never knew what it was. I never even knew. I mean, I never took it upon myself to learn about it either. But what a powerful moment When Jesus and his fulfillment by being taken back up into heaven and bringing the Spirit down, it fulfilled the law and brought the Spirit and brought the relationship that we have with God. Because with him, like Paul said, it was him providing the life that we get to um, that we get to have. So powerful. So the counting of the Omer takes us on a spiritual journey, and this is designed to transcend this place of confusion of our identity and our purpose and bring us into an unbreakable connection to our God because of the Spirit within us. I mean, just that. Think about that. We are aligning with God coming down twice, twice. First, when he took his people out of Egypt and he spent that time in the wilderness with them. And then again in Jesus's day, when he spent that time when Jesus was resurrected and he was with the disciples for those days, and what he was teaching them to sustain them, to prepare them, and to send them off to go into step into their purpose. So a little bit of and an overview of the how to. So each evening when we count the Omer, the counter or you, or if you're married and you want your husband, or you could give it to your child to do, whoever is going to count the Omer recites a blessing. And the blessing says, "Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who has sanctified us with his commandments and commanded us to count the Omer." And it states, so what you do is you repeat that. Now we know in Jesus we have freedom. So this is not where it's about rules and you have to do this a particular way, but how cool when we align with these blessings, and we don't want to miss them. So take advantage of them. Do it. Share every day the blessing. And then every day after you share that, you say, today is the fourth day of the Omer. And then after, what they do is after the first 6 days, then they would include the number of weeks. So if, for example, you'd say today is 13 days, which is 1 week and 6 days of the Omer, however you want to count it. But you want to establish that every day you are posturing yourself, right? It's a posture to be humble and in humility to say this prayer, this blessing. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who has sanctified us with his commandments and commanded us to count the Omer. So we want to just experience this blessing, right? And it's a practice. So each night's count is followed by reciting Psalm 67. And then it says in a few short petitions for spiritual cleansing. And I brought up Psalm 67 so we could read it. And it's really key. This is really cool. The Hebrew version of Psalm 67 contains exactly 49 words corresponding to the 49 days of the Omer. And it also includes the themes of the harvest and God's salvation, Yeshua being made known all over the earth. So I'm going to read it. So Psalm 67 says this. Okay. God be gracious to us and bless us. May he make his face shine toward us so that your way may be known on earth, your salvation among all nations. Let the peoples give thanks to you, God. Let the peoples give thanks to you, all of them. Let the nations be glad and shout for joy, for you will judge the peoples fairly and guide the nations on earth. So let the people give thanks to you, God. Let them give thanks to you, all of them. The earth has yielded its harvest. May God, our God, bless us. May God continue to bless us so that the ends of the earth will fear him. So there is that fear of God is a deep respect and honor towards God. So love that. So the counting of the Omer is there to guide us on a spiritual journey of preparation, self-introspection, and maturing of our character traits. It offers an annual period an annual meaning yearly, to work out our salvation with fear and trembling, which is Philippians 2:12. So making that understanding that that's not about it's about having a healthy fear, not a fear that is founded in not understanding the true heart of God. And if there is anything coming up in you about when you think about that, reach out, talk about it. God is wanting to bring up anything in this time, bringing up so it can be healed, because anything that you don't understand or that you see God in a different way is going to hinder your ability to receive and receive love, receive whatever He has for you, especially in this season. So important. So it brings us to a higher revelation of God and the individual message and mission that He has for each one of us. So good. So good. So counting of the Omer has so much significance. And each year that I've done it, it has brought me more and more depth of understanding. So I am doing this time through the lens of when I sit down and look each day at the Omer and the aspect of God's heart. I'm first doing it through that lens of grasping the endurance of God's love and understanding that without Jesus, I can't possibly have that. We can't. Jesus fills in the gap for us. So good. So you guys have a blessed and beautiful Wednesday. And hopefully Judy and I will be jumping on here later tonight live, to just connect. We haven't been able to do that yet. And she's been traveling and out. And so hopefully that's going to happen tonight. We'll give you guys a heads up if we can, but please share with us what you're learning. And we're just excited to have you with us. So have a beautiful and blessed day, and sending you shalom and all the love today. Okay.